Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is going to be all about Chapter 25, Part 2 of the main campaign, so careful for spoilers ahead if you're not caught up to date on the main story. This new content released in the past week at the time of recording, here at the end of May 2022, and this is the conclusion of our penultimate chapter in Dragalia Lost. We know that Chapter 26, which is going to have Part 1 release in June and Part 2 release in July, will be the final story update for Dragalia Lost. So with this second half of Chapter 25 that released just now, we're really coming close to our finale. And I think that this was a pretty good story update overall. There were some fun fan service moments with the boss fights that were pretty enjoyable to take on. The story is progressing toward its conclusion with this arc centered around Xenos, or the Progenitor. We got the culmination of a clash between Mordecai and Xenos that was sort of setting up in the previous half of the chapter. And we also got a lot of time spent on Xena, who is a character that's been with us since the beginning of the game as the mysterious masked Zethia. And we really learn a lot more about her homeworld and actually get to spend some time there even. And I thought that was also a really nice touch with this one. So although there are lots of characters who I wish we'd have the time to get some exposition around as we wind down toward the end of Dragalia Lost, like Ronzel, Alex, and so on that are part of the main cast, I would want to spend more time with them because I feel like we kind of got that in the first half of this chapter with a nice moment, a touching moment between Elisan and the Prince. Well, this time around, it was really focused on Xena, and so if there is one character among our main characters that I think deserves that extra time, it'd probably be her because of that role she's played since the beginning of the game, even in the marketing materials and so on. So I really like how she was treated in this chapter. I thought that that was really a nice nod to her story and closure for her story as well. But as for a synopsis of what happened, as I mentioned, things start off with the culmination of this confrontation between Mordecai and the Progenitor. And we found out last time that Mordecai is the Progenitor's discarded heart, or Xenos' discarded heart that he felt he had no need for in the end. Mordecai has learned a lot in his absence from our party, by traveling in the space between worlds, visiting different worlds, which I think in Dragalia Lost terms you can sort of think of as different parallel realities or alternate realities. And so in traveling these different planes of existence, Mordecai has come to learn a lot about the Progenitor and some ways to effectively combat the Progenitor, with Mordecai himself having sort of a part of that power and a special connection to Xenos because he is that discarded heart. Now let me pause for a moment here and just acknowledge what's happening on screen, because to me, this was one of those really awesome fan service moments of this chapter where we actually fight all of the primal dragons back to back to back. And the reason this happens, to get back into the story synopsis, is that, well, Xenos appears on the screen, Mordecai is able to thwart his plans, the Progenitor's plans being to have his one controlled, perfect stronghold reality or stronghold world engulf and destroy all other realities and all other possibility and all other worlds. Mordecai's able to thwart that by using the bonds or links between the different worlds to kind of hold off that stronghold from engulfing everything. And afterward, Xenos and Baron retreat, and the Auspexes come to the decision that they have to defeat all the primal dragons at once. There's no time for them to wait for individual trials to power themselves up. It's all or nothing at this point, and so that's why we get this awesome boss fight where we battle one primal dragon after the other. Now granted, these are a lot easier in the story than they are in the actual dragon trials, so it's more of a taste of these battles, but hopefully if you're somebody that hasn't kept up with the endgame and some of those endgame trials are too difficult for you, hopefully these are balanced in such a way that you get a real flavor of these battles, because I thought it was just awesome that you get to fight them all in a row in a boss rush type setting. Anyway, the Auspexes carry out this trial, but one of the Auspexes, namely Xena, is having difficulty accessing her power to manipulate or create worlds, and the reason for that is that she is really just a projection from her original homeworld, where she traveled to our world using the Dawn Shard, and she's not really in her own body. And so she comes to the decision that she's going to go back to her homeworld and sever the chain of causality with that world. And what that's going to mean is that she's going to be able to move to our world with her body, but she'll slowly be forgotten in much the same way that Audric was. Now let me pause for a moment here again, as you can see what happens when we head to her homeworld. We get to battle against Dark Emperor Yuden. And this is just such an insane boss fight to have too, that I feel like is really, really cool from a fan service standpoint. Once again, the type of fight, of course, I wish was a little bit harder, since we're just way too OP for Yuden at this stage. But to me, this was a really epic moment, so I want to acknowledge that that's happening on screen. But anyway, Zaina makes that decision. Yuden decides to go ahead and go with her. He is able to travel in the space between worlds. He's unlocked his Bondforge powers, so he's going to be totally fine. And he has his connection to the Other as well, having been created from the Other's flesh. We go into that other ruined world that Zaina comes from, where Yuden took over and became an evil emperor, having taken on the power of the Other Mursayati, and also having forced all the Great Worms into an amalgamation that we know as Kronos. And so ultimately we have to battle that evil Emperor Yuden, and that's this battle that you see here. He even goes into his Kronos form, which is this next and final battle of the chapter. But after all of that is said and done, he's defeated. We also find out that he wants to intentionally cause the collapse of lots of different worlds or realities, and thereby ensure that the progenitor's stronghold world is able to come to dominate all of existence. And the reason for that is because he is the vessel, so to speak, of the progenitor in his reality, in Zaina's reality, whereas Ferris was that same vessel in our world that we know, that we're familiar with. So it's a lot to follow at times. Some of the characters like Nott and Ronzel even talk about this being way over their head and, wanting it explained in simpler terms. But essentially, that Dark Emperor Yuden timeline that Zaina's in, he is actually the vessel for the progenitor, and he wants to destroy that world because it has so much black mana in it, and I think due to the linkages of that world and others, it would cause a chain reaction and essentially detonate and destroy lots of different realities. That's sort of the way it's explained in a nutshell. So, we obviously don't want that to happen, but I think it basically ends up happening anyway, where that world gets destroyed, we're in the space between worlds at some point. Zaina does end up taking her brother Dark Prince Yuden's life, or Dark Emperor Yuden's life, which is a really somber moment, but also gives her a lot of closure, and I think gives her arc a lot of closure. And with all the atrocities we know he's committed, or at least in some form or fashion, we think about like Audric's storyline and Fractured Futures, it feels like an appropriate end. But it's interesting that there is some remnant of Yuden's personality in there, because his belief, unwavering to the end, is that in destroying all these different realities, it's ultimately going to lead to one peaceful, eternal reality under the progenitor. So he still has a motivation that could be construed as somewhat good, but obviously is warped by the progenitor's influence as well. So anyway, that's kind of what happens in the chapter. That gets destroyed, that world gets destroyed. We come back into our main world, where Ilya is, where the whole team is, and at that point, we realize that things are in disarray in all the different realities. The stronghold is beginning to approach and engulf everything again. And Xenos shows up again, and he says that Dragalia is lost. And I think that's the closing line of the chapter. And the next chapter is going to be called Dragalia Lost. So we'll see what happens in the next chapter. I'm certainly hyped for it. I just want to show the characters, the chapters, or story segments rather, and then the screenshots from this, the story screenshots. We'll close on the one with Zaina and Dark Emperor Yuden, because I think that's a really powerful one. Obviously, this one's from the first half of the chapter with the Stronghold. But that is going to do it for today, everybody. So thank you as always for watching. Let me know what you think about this chapter in the comments below. Otherwise, though, take care, and I'll see you next time.